Jacquelyn Kramer is the Senior Planner in Golden Valley Community Development Department, which works to balance Golden Valley's growth and revitalization while ensuring vibrant neighborhoods and top-notch quality of life. She works on development applications, long-range planning studies, and city code updates. And she'll be telling us today about Golden Valley's missing middle housing study. Jacquelyn has an educational background in architecture and urban planning, and before joining Golden Valley, she worked for the city of St. Louis Park for 6 years. She's originally from southern Minnesota and now lives in Minneapolis with her husband, 2 boys, and their dog, Fried Chicken. Welcome, Jacquelyn. How did you ever come up with that name? I really want to know.
So we actually adopted our dog from the Golden Valley Humane Society, which hopefully you're all familiar with it. It's a wonderful facility and organization. And we went in the morning, we saw a couple dogs, played with them, and then we went out to lunch at Good Day Cafe, actually. So we were eating and talking about dog names. So we started talking about food names for dogs, because I think that's really cute if you name your dog after a food. And my 6-year-old said, fried chicken. And that was it. Like, I can't come up with a better name than that. So her name is Fried Chicken. She is from Mississippi, so she is from the South, so it's kind of appropriate. So that's that story. Thank you for having me. I met Peggy at an event that was put on by the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Commission back in March. Gosh, it was so long ago. And the title of that event was Who Can Afford to Live in Golden Valley? So it was talking about housing and the ways that some folks have been excluded from having access to housing in our community as well as across the city and the country. And so Peggy asked me to come here to talk about one of the things that our city is doing to help provide more housing for folks. This is the Missing Middle Housing Study. It's a roadmap to understanding how smaller multi-unit housing types, which would be like duplexes, triplexes, accessory dwelling units or ADUs, can fit into neighborhoods in ways that are attractive, affordable, and sustainable. And it's the next step in expanding housing choices in Golden Valley. So this slide has the key objectives of the study. But why are we doing this study? So there's a couple reasons, like external reasons for us to do this study, and then sort of internal or things that City Council and the community find valuable that led to this study. One is Metropolitan Council sets long-range goals for how your community will grow. So they basically do a lot of analysis over several years for each city in the metro area. And they say you can expect to have this many more households in your community. You need to plan for it. So part of this study is figuring out how we can fit all these new people into our community over the next few decades, looking out to 2050. City Council also has strategic directives, and one of these is to foster a healthy mix of housing stock that accommodates various price points and life stages. So what we found when we talk to folks in our community is that we have a lot of lovely single-family homes. We have great housing stock for single-family homes. We have a couple high-rise apartments, and there's nothing really in between. So if someone is ready to downsize, move out of their big house but move somewhere smaller, maybe they don't need a yard anymore, but they still want to own their own home, we don't have a lot of that housing type here. We also don't have a lot of affordable housing. We don't have a lot of housing that's good for folks who just graduate from college and want to come back to where they grew up. Those starter homes, townhomes, we just don't have that kind of stock in our city. So this study is looking at, are there ways we can allow these things or provide opportunities for these sort of housing types to be built in a way that still fits the character of Golden Valley, that would fit in with the neighborhood and not be really disruptive. Additionally, over the last now 3 years at the state legislature, there's been bills that have looked at statewide mandates for requiring more housing density. So what that means is you can have a neighborhood that's all single family homes, and it's zoned for that, which is city law that says you can only have one house per lot. The folks at the State House have been looking at requiring every city in the state to allow like 2 houses on every lot. So it's kind kind of a top-down approach to helping with housing affordability, which is a good goal, but it doesn't allow a lot of local control for cities, and it doesn't allow a lot of flexibility. So we're trying to get ahead of that sort of legislation. It may or may not happen this year. I think probably not, because it's an election year and our elected officials are thinking about other things right now than providing more housing choice. But I think it'll come back next year, so we want to be able to plan for that sort of law in a way that fits Golden Valley. It's not a kind of a top-down, one-size-fits-all approach, which might not work as well for us. So like I said, the goals of this study are to advance our city council's strategic directives, give us more local control over housing. We want to increase the variety of housing we have, provide folks with more choice, allow folks to build wealth. You know, you could build a granny flat on your home, you could rent it out, you could have a caretaker stay there so that you could stay in your home and not have to go to assisted living. Maybe generate more income, you could have your kids move in when they come back from school and need a few years to get on their feet. Just providing more flexibility and more ability for folks to have the sort of home they want to have in our city. And it also is a way to address some of the harms inflicted on marginalized populations by exclusionary housing policies. So this is things like redlining, where several decades ago, there were certain neighborhoods throughout the country where you could not get a home loan, you couldn't get a mortgage through a bank. Those communities were predominantly people of color, and that was intentional on the part of city officials, of the bank, to exclude families of color from owning homes. And so we're trying to, again, increase opportunities for more homes so that we can start to right some of those historic wrongs that occurred in our city and frankly in every city in the US. So this study, it's looking specifically at missing middle. So this is one small piece of a puzzle that is solving housing, which is a really big problem, a very tricky problem. How do you get housing for everyone that they can afford? Missing middle, kind of a general definition, is housing in a range of buildings with multiple units, compatible in scale and form to what we call detached single-family homes. So that's the typical home you would see in Golden Valley. Missing middle housing, and this is a bunch of different types of it. It's going to be about the same size as a single-family home. It'll look pretty similar. There might just be an extra door or an extra sidewalk that indicates more than one family can live there. In Golden Valley specifically, missing middle housing is trying to create more choices and build long-term flexibility and affordability into our housing marketplace so that we can meet the needs of our residents now and 50 years from now. So this image is showing, these are detached single-family homes on the left. So that's, again, what most of our housing stock is in Golden Valley. And then you have duplexes, fourplexes, 2 units on the bottom, 2 on the top, but it's still a 2-story home. That's not really much bigger than a home you would find in Golden Valley. All the way to smaller apartments, cottage courts, which are little single-family homes that are centered around a central courtyard. So they have that shared outdoor green space, but each home is its own separate building. So missing middle housing can look like, or it can be a bunch of different forms. And what this study is, just some examples, both local and throughout the state, of what missing middle can look like. So it could be a townhome, it could be a row of townhomes. It could be just a side-by-side duplex or a twin home, which again just looks like a big house. So this study, the first part, our consultants took a deep dive into our demographics, both now and what's projected to be in the future. They looked at our housing market, and I included some boards way in the back you can check out later, shows really how expensive housing is in Golden Valley, which this is not a shock to anyone, but it's, when you look at the median income of a family and then how much a house costs in Golden Valley, there's a big gap. It's really hard for a lot of families to afford a home in Golden Valley. They also looked at zoning, and they looked at a bunch of maps to figure out where in the city there might be space and infrastructure capacity to have a little bit more, a little more density, a little more families living in that area. There was also, the second stage was, skip ahead, they did what's called a fit test. So they looked at all the different types of missing middle, that's the boxes on the bottom, and they figured out which zoning districts in our city they would fit, given setbacks, so how far between your house and the property line you have to be, how much impervious coverage you can have on your lot. So that's saying you can only have so much driveway and building on your lot before it's too covered and it's harder for rainwater or stormwater to drain away. Building height. And they figured out what would fit into our neighborhoods given what's already there. Again, trying to fit in these missing middle housing types so that they essentially match our neighborhoods. And it's not disruptive if they were built. And the study also thought about what policy and programmatic changes are needed to facilitate or encourage folks to build these things. Because it's really expensive to build a home. And folks might not be familiar with the particular building codes of building a duplex. So what can we as a city do to help folks out who want to do these things? Let's see. The end of this study, which will probably go to council in June with the final study, there's going to be a list of recommendations. They're divided into two categories: code recommendations and program recommendations. So code is talking about city code, the local rules about what you can build, what kind of uses you can have on each property. These are looking at site design standards. If you build a duplex, would you maybe be allowed to have a slightly smaller front yard? We have really big front yards in Golden Valley. It's usually 35 feet plus the right-of-way, which is another 10 feet. What if we gave folks, we let them have 5 more feet of living space on the front so they could get another unit inside? How would that fit with our neighborhoods? Would that be okay? They looked at things like allowing more accessory dwelling units. So those are the granny flats. When you build a little walkout unit in your basement, or if you have an addition on your house, are there ways we can make it easier to build these ADUs so that you can have a 1-bedroom apartment that you either rent out to bring in some more income, or maybe you move an aging parent in so they can be close to you but still have their own space. Again, trying to provide housing that fits all types of families, all types of income levels. So the study's kind of wrapping up. We've gathered most of our data. The consultants and city staff have done most of their analysis. Next week at the city council work session, we're going to present the draft of the plan to council to get their feedback on the recommendations. We'll also be going to planning commission over the next month to get their feedback and their recommendation, and final adoption of the study in June. And then we start phase 2, because we're government, we have multi-phases and lots of process. And that's going to be mostly community engagement. So we have done some surveys asking folks, if you could build an ADU, what would you use it for? Mostly what we heard is folks want to age in place. They want to stay in their house as long as possible, but they might not need a big house. So build an ADU, have a little apartment on site. They can stay, they can have other family move into the big house or rent it out. Again, providing options for their family members when they need a little help with housing. So we're going to do community engagement through the summer and fall, asking folks what they think about these recommendations we might have, how they might want to live in a missing middle house, like an ADU or a duplex. What would incentivize them? What kind of help would they need if they wanted to build something like that on their property? And then we would start creating new programs or adopting new city code later in the fall or winter after we get all of this community feedback and hear what folks want when it comes to providing a little more housing choice in the city. So that's a brief summary of a very complicated topic, but I'm happy to answer any questions. My contact information on the left. I also included Christine Costello. She's our housing and economic development manager. So if you had any questions about housing specifically, like someone who needs help finding housing, or you want to know, what housing programs do we have in the city right now for rehab assistance or affordable housing, anything like that, she is your go-to. She also does a lot of economic development work. So if you've got a ribbon cutting coming up, or someone who has a small business who might need a little help, she's the person to turn to at the city.
neighboring cities are having similar conversations, or if their landscape is already more diverse than ours.
Yes, so, yes. I think for sure every first ring and probably second ring suburb is a city in the Twin Cities. Is having this conversation. Minneapolis and St. Paul, they're kind of a whole different thing, right? They're much bigger than us. They have been doing these things for years, but their housing needs are greater. I know St. Louis Park has recently, in the last year or two, updated their zoning code in a very similar way, so they allow duplexes in many more parts of the city. I believe Edina and Richfield have done similar things, so we're kind of in line with what other folks in the community are doing. And one of the things our consultant looked at was precedent or case studies from throughout the country and also local. I think Bloomington was one of the case studies they did, as well as Sacramento, California, specifically looking at, well, how do they allow more ADUs in a way that doesn't overwhelm a neighborhood? You know, we're always worried about traffic and parking and sewer and water and making sure we have enough infrastructure to support, you know, the planned growth we have. But yes, this is, and I mean, like I said, housing is expensive. Rent is really, really expensive. New builds, like the Wynn, which is a new apartment building in City Hall, I think a studio goes $1,700, $1,800, $1,900 a month for a little 600 square foot studio. Yeah. It's just, it's really, construction is expensive. Materials are expensive, labor is expensive. So to provide housing for folks that can afford it, you have to do a lot of different things as a city. This is one of the things we can do. You know, we can't control how much wood costs or steel, but we can make our rules, clarify our rules and make them a little more streamlined so that if folks want to build an ADU, they can. That's the goal of this.
And on the news last night, maybe, they were talking about Lakeville and how Lakeville has put a freeze on any more growth for a period of time because they've been expanding so fast. Are we gonna be seeing more of that, do you think, or?
I don't think we'd see that in Golden Valley because our city boundaries are pretty set and we're pretty built out. There is not a lot of vacant land in the city. So most of the time when we, yeah, whereas Lakeville, and one of the issues that suburbs that are a little more spread out than us see is it's really expensive to build and maintain roads, sewer pipes, water lines, and the city pays for that stuff through property taxes, through taxes. But that's per household, so if you have, you know, low density, not a lot of houses in a big area, but it needs a lot of roads and pipes to service those folks, it's really expensive to maintain those communities. That might be why Lakeville is saying, we gotta pause, we can't, you know, expand anymore because we can't afford it. And that's one of the benefits of missing middle is because you can have, you know, 2 units maybe next to each other or with a small yard rather than a big yard. It's a lot cheaper to run sewer and road to those 2 units than it would be if they were way far apart.
I noticed a neighbor had built a structure that's basically like a double garage, and then above it like an office space or something. So I presume that people are getting permits to do stuff like that now. Can you fill us in how that
So
works?
we do allow accessory dwelling units right now with certain conditions. And so an accessory dwelling unit, it's basically a little apartment. You have to have a bedroom, a bathroom, and a kitchen. So, and already a lot of folks might just be doing an office above their garage. That doesn't need special approvals necessarily, but if you want to do an ADU, you have to follow certain setbacks, there's certain building code rules, and it's really expensive to build what is essentially a new apartment over your garage, so it's kind of cost prohibitive. But there is a way to do it now. One of the things this study is looking at is, are there some rules that aren't really necessary or they're not serving public safety or public good? And we can get rid of them so that it's a little bit easier to build this ADU while still, you know, not casting shadows over your neighbor's yard or facilitating the cut down of a ton of trees. You know, this kind of weighing the cost benefits of those things. So yeah, your neighbor might be building an ADU, they might just be building like a home office or storage space above their garage. Those are both allowed right now.
Okay, yeah, but it's a separate building.
Yeah, you can
Oh,
do
okay.
that, yeah, either detached, which just means it's like its own freestanding garage or ADU, or just attached to the house. And there's slightly different rules depending on if it's by itself or if it's attached to the house.
Okay. Any more questions, you guys?
I just got an offbeat question.
Please.
If a person wants to do geothermal heat,
Yeah,
does the city allow drilling wells in your yard for geothermal?
that's a good question, which is outside zoning.
Peggy would say yes.
Yes.
Do you have geothermal on your lot?
Is it
But
wells?
it was a while ago that you did
Yeah,
that.
it was probably, 7 years ago.
Oh,
And is it horizontal?
It was longer
Because
than that.
Vertical.
it's vertical?
I thought it was diagonal. No, it's vertical?
You would definitely need one or more permits for that, probably building and probably a stormwater management, since you're going through water. I don't know the answer, but I can give you contact information
I
from
was
staff
just
who would.
curious, that's all.
No, that's a really interesting question. I do know that, the city is looking at building a new city hall because our building is falling apart and the HVAC doesn't work, among many other things.
Oh.
And one of the things we're looking at is doing geothermal on that block, which would be really cool.
So that's
For
part of
city
your summer
building,
plans.
You can do the geothermal in the parking lot,
Yeah,
but a residence, you don't have a parking lot.